If you feel like you need to loosen up your watercolors because you tend to overwork them, or you're feeling a bit too tight, or your paintings feel heavy and lifeless to you, I've been there and I have a genius trick to share that will help you overcome these problems. Hi, I'm Françoise. Welcome back to my channel. It all starts with granulating watercolors, and I'm going to show you how these can help with this new set by Schmincke called the Urban Set. And it's not the first time I use them, because various brands have granulating watercolors. These by Schmincke are part of a series, and I own at least 4 other ones of their super granulating watercolor sets, and they're just great. But still, there's a way to enhance the effect you get with them, and that I'll show you in the video. What's special with granulating watercolors are the heavier particles in these paints that tend to clump together, and that is what creates mottled washes of paint, especially when you use watercolor papers with a rougher texture. And you'll see it's totally the case for me here with this Beohong cold pressed paper. The colors in that kind of paint also tend to separate, and you can already see it clearly when I mix the urban yellow paint here. There's this purplish tone showing, and it comes out really subtle and nice on paper. What's great about this tendency for pigments to clump together is that it's really hard to make a painting look really smooth and even, and to me it even looks a bit more rustic and natural. If you look closely, we can see the purple tones separating from the yellow tones. It's very discreet, and in a realistic style like mine, it will be most effective in a background that is meant to stay loose. Here it's not going to be the case because I'm covering up most of the paper with mountains, and there will be a bit more detail later. And that's exactly where we're at risk to end up with a heavy painting. Because the way a perfectionist, or someone with a tendency to overwork, or someone with a tight style, or all of these combined, someone like me and maybe you would proceed, is to add to the painting again and again and again to build the realism. And you know that it's easy to get carried away and add too much. And adding to a watercolor painting is a skill that we need to learn and master. It actually took me a couple of years to get to that point, and I found in the process that granulating watercolors make it way easier when you don't know when to stop and you overdo it. Here, for example, I'm adding paint to build shape, colors, and details while working on wet for a while. I just increased the quantity of pigments in the paint as the paper slowly dries, and I managed to do a lot in one go because I'm used to managing water and paint very well with watercolors. You can see the textured looks coming through a bit already. I find this is helping because it makes it more difficult to build up a lot of crisp and heavy detail quickly. There's room and time for some refinement of shapes and colors. And one great thing about these paints is they can also be lifted easily, so it really helps if you add too much. The outcome feels like a light and dreamy look, and you'll see that there's another very important factor that contributes to that with these paints. By the way, you can learn to paint this landscape with me in real time on my Patreon, and I'll add the link to that in the description. I give my patrons some color alternatives when you don't have the granulating paints, so everybody can have a go at it. The other factor that contributes to a looser, lighter look are the soft colors of the granulating and super granulating paints, especially the Schmincke sets. And that's something that I feel like not a lot of people talk about when it comes to those paints. I have painted with such paints from Daniel Smith. Maybe you've tried the beautiful Moonglow granulating watercolor before, and there are many others to try. And what I really appreciate with those, but also the Schmincke's Super Granulation series, is that the colors are never flashy, they're muted and elegant. And you can see that even after a second layer and a lot of darker colors added, there's this softness in the painting. And that's why I think that it's really hard to overdo it in terms of colors as well. With the Schmincke sets like my urban set here, it's also only 5 colors per set, so you can be pretty sure that they were picked to go well together. If you're not into muted watercolors, a power tip for more lively paintings is to add another normal and brighter color when you don't want your paintings to be very muted, because the danger could also be to make them look a bit dull, especially if you were to use a lot of the dark colors. Here, for instance, it would be the urban brown and urban gray. And I'm gonna show you how I play it in those cases. So for example, here on my landscape is a green northern lands atmosphere, and I really wanted to render that through the color green, but I wanted it to stay natural at the same time. So I used the greenish yellow tube from Art Philosophy to add some freshness to the piece without taking away from my Schmincke's muted colors, since I just used a little, and I even mixed it with the urban green color at times. The urban set, like all the other Schmincke sets I've tried, have these very earthy colors, and if you like this, I recommend to try one. You can see here that in the darkest areas of the painting, I added this urban red color. It makes me think of a Venetian red, and I kept doing this, adding brighter colors in those dark areas by overlapping colors and brushing them into a previous layer. And that is an effective technique to make sure that your shadows are on point, but they're never too dark nor too dull, and it works with granulating watercolors but also regular watercolors. It's really important to leverage color mixing and the power of layers. Something else that you can do is to leverage all of the tools that you have all around, and not just the granulating watercolors. I already used the greenish yellow from Art Philosophy for bright greens, but I also chose to add a little bit of whitewash in places at the very end of the process. And a mistake I have made, and I still make sometimes, is to go overboard with that, with the highlights. The best, most discreet ones are obtained through either whitewash or white watercolor, in my opinion. A white gel pen is great, for instance, but you really need to be careful not to add too much because it's so crisp and so strong. Whitewash and white watercolor, on the other hand, they can be faded, they can be mixed with water to look almost transparent, and they're also super easy to remove completely, like here, and you can see how the small touches on the waterfall and the rocks help brighten up the whole painting gently. So granulating and super granulating watercolors don't take away from realism despite the mottled look. On the contrary, I find they're able to amplify the loose aspect of watercolors within the realism that you want to add to a painting. And I have another video here that you can watch about these paints for more examples. I hope you enjoyed watching the process, and I'll see you next time.